السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We'll continue inshallah ta'ala with the book of Fiqh of Marriage, Fiqh of Marriage by Sheikh Ibrahim rahimahullah. We had before Ramadan, we had reached we finished chapter number 9. So we'll go through chapter number 10, inshallah. Chapter number 10 from the book of Fiqh of Marriage. So the title of chapter number 10 is the result of divorce, or what happens as a result of divorce. The previous chapter was the rulings of divorce. So now, if the divorce happened, what are some of the rulings that comes as a result of that? And this is again, this is the last chapter, and this would be like in brief, some of the rulings and some of the questions that was asked to the Sheikh, and we can go through that also briefly. But we have to be careful with questions, because to learn from fatwa or questions is not something that is feasible for everyone, especially that the fatwa or the answers usually is just tied to the question, and people can be different from one person to the other. So you cannot get a general ruling from just answering questions. But again, briefly, and then inshallah next time we'll go through something else. The Sheikh rahimahullah, he mentioned that, since divorce is separation between the husband and the wife in a specific way, so there are many ahkam or many rulings that comes as a result of that. One of which is the iddah, the obligation of the iddah. And the iddah is come from al-adad, from something that is to be counted, which is here in this case is the days or the months after talaq, which is an obligation. And this iddah, certain rulings to be applied in the iddah. This iddah, where the main one, that it's not permissible for the woman to get remarried to someone else if she's still in the period of al-iddah after the divorce. And this iddah, it's in the case where the marriage was consummated, or they were alone, because the consummation of marriage, when is it constituted as consummation of marriage? Is if two people have the contract of marriage is done, established, and they were in a room, in an apartment, in a house alone, and the khilwa, or to be alone in a way that it's known to the people to be alone, like even if it's, as some of the ulama they say, if the curtains are down, if the doors are closed, even if nothing happened, still if divorce happens, then the iddah is to be observed. So this iddah, because if a person, either he divorces his wife before he is with her alone, or afterwards. If it's before they're alone, there's no iddah. The contract of marriage is done, and then divorce happens without them being alone, there's no iddah. And this is, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly said in Surah Al-Ahzab, يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نكحتم المؤمنات ثم طلقتموهن من قبل أن تمسوهن فما لكم عليهن من عدة تعتدونها. That we believe if you marry the women, then you divorce them before you touch them, then there's no iddah to count them. So if the marriage is consummated, then the iddah is 3 menses if she is from among those who have menses, and 3 months if she's not having menses, like old in age or so. So either 3 menses or 3 months if there's no menses, or to give birth if she's pregnant, even if it's after a few days or so. So these are the 3 types of iddah. Either 3 menses. We talked about the proper way of making divorce versus the non-proper way, or the sunnah way versus the bid'i way. The proper way to make divorce is in a period or in a time when the wife, she is not in her menses, and it's in a state of purity, and they did not have relations in this state of purity. This is with a talaq that is proper. So if that happens, that means she's divorced in the time when she's not in her menses and they did not have relations, then is to wait for 3 menses afterwards for the iddah, or 3 months, or for the giving birth. That means that's the end of the iddah. So that's the first ruling, which is the obligation of the iddah. If it's the 3rd divorce, then the marriage is irrevocable, and it's forbidden for the wife to go back to her husband. Because if it's the 1st or the 2nd divorce, and this is also part of the iddah, is that she is to stay in the house with her husband during the time of iddah. She's not forbidden on her husband, which is unlike many people, the way they think, They think once the words of divorce are uttered, that means that they are forbidden from one another and she leaves the house. But that's not permissible actually for her to leave the house without the permission of her husband, and they are still married, right? And that's why there's this waiting period. If the waiting period is finished, then they are forbidden from one another. That's in the case of the first divorce or the second divorce. After the third divorce, then they are forbidden and immediately, and that is to leave or for them to be completely separated. And it is not permissible for them to be remarried again. Unless, and the way that it's mentioned, unless it's not like a way for them to go back together, they are forbidden forever. But if it happened that she married someone else after, some time, and then they were divorced, and after their iddah is over, and if she wants to go to the previous husband, then that's permissible. And this is what clearly the verses mentions. So this is with regards to the 3 menses. There are many rulings, of course, but the Sheikh did mention that is just briefly here stated. Afterwards, there are some questions that are mentioned, one of which is the rulings of marriage. And we talked about that in the very beginning and the importance of it and the benefits of it. As we know that marriage is part of being a Muslim is to get married. It's part of the deen. There are verses of the Quran and hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and Muslims, communities, people need to make sure that they get people married. People should not stay without marriage. And even though there are so many problems nowadays with marriages and so many divorces, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect the households of the Muslims. But it's something that needs to be also fixed. But that doesn't mean that people should refrain from marriage. Things should be done in the proper way. But part of why there's so much problems is that because people do not understand, or out of ignorance or the lack of righteousness or any other reasons. But one of which is people do not understand the reality of marriage and why marriage, and the different rights of marriages and of marriage, and the different roles between the men and the women. Right? If a man knows what is the responsibilities of a man versus a woman knows what the responsibility for the woman, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made unique for each, this is an essential thing. But when men and women are competing with one another for something that is even against their own nature, it creates all kinds of problems. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from that. And that's why people, they should be educated before they get married and after they get married. And to agree upon that the deen is the thing that direct our lives and things like this. And to be proud of knowing the rulings of the deen of Islam, and to stay away from what is being, spread among the Muslims from other ways of life and things that is evil. So to establish the deen of Allah, to protect one's honor and dignity, to be obedient to Allah, this is one of the ways to achieve that, is by having by getting married, and to lower the gaze and to protect one's chastity and to fulfill the wish of the Prophet ﷺ, تزوجوا الودود الولود فإني مكاثر بكم الأنبياء يوم القيامة. Get married to the wadud, the loving one, the one that gives birth, because I will be proud of you, of the number of the believers in the day of Al-Qiyamah with the prophets. And this is one of the means of strength of an ummah, is to have abundance in numbers. And it's not just about numbers, of course, yes, but this is one of the means to establish power and strength, and to raise them as obedient slaves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And many other benefits, of course. Also, one of the things that are mentioned is that the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, يَا مَعْشَرَ الشَّبَابِ مَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ مِنْكُمُ الْبَاءَةَ فَلْيَتَزَوَّجْ. Oh, young people, whoever has the means of al-ba'a, then he should get married. What is the ba'a? The ba'a is the ability to get married. Whoever is able to get married, then they should get married. But the word al-ba'a, right, it's basically the physical and the financial abilities for a person to get married. And, and it's of course of the present. Nobody can guarantee what's going to happen in the future, but this is with what is present. And for people, or to people to set very high standards of wealth or so for people to get married, this is injustice, and people should overcome this. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised those who are poor that Allah will provide for them from His bounties if they get married for the sake of Allah. And the Sheikh also advised because the Prophet ﷺ, when he spoke with regards to marriage, he said, Ya ma'ashar al-shabab, O young people, get married. You don't wait till you're old and you get married. You need to get married as soon as you can if you have the ability, of course. And that's why the shabab or the youth or the young, they need to gear up to that responsibility by being men and being responsible, and for the same thing for the women to prepare themselves for the next stage of life. And when people are raised to just to have their own personal achievements in the workplace and enslaving them just to be money making machines or something like this, and overlooking the importance of establishing families. Establishing a family is such an important thing, and more honorable, more important than establishing a company or establishing your career or whatever there is. Of course, establishing the family requires for the person to have financial abilities and things like this. But to establish a family, this is with the benefits of it religiously and also for any community or any place or any country. It's such an important achievement. So that's why this is, and to establish the family in the proper way is by getting married and also in the proper way according to the way of the Prophet ﷺ. That's why the process of choosing and looking, all these things with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some of the questions related to some specific things in people's cultures and things like this. And in general, it's okay to observe the different cultures as long as it's not against the deen of Islam and as long as it's not extreme or making what's not an obligation to be an obligation or otherwise. So this is also to be observed, and this can be different from one place to the other. Also, when someone asks the Sheikh about what's the sunnah and the mahr, the sunnah is to make it not difficult and to mention it in the aqd, of course. And to make it not difficult, it brings more compassionate and goodness between the husband and the wife. And each person according to their capacity, and not to make it difficult for the husband, for example, for such a thing. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be something light, so light that there's not significant. No, I mean, Musa alayhi salam, his mahr was to work for 8 years. So it's something that is worth to put effort in it, but without putting burden on the person that prevents him from having a normal relationship. There's many different things, of course, to be mentioned with regards to the time of engagement, and not to make this as a long period of time. And as we said before, that engagement does not makes what's haram halal, and some of the things with regards to the walima and the extravagance that a person might do versus to be generous. It's important, but not to be extravagant, and to observe, of course, the rules and the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we'll stop here, inshallah ta'ala. So this is basically in brief the end of this subject. And next time, inshallah ta'ala, since it's getting closer to Hajj, even if you're not planning to go for Hajj, it's important to review some of the rulings of Hajj as the ways of the people of knowledge always at this time, briefly, inshallah ta'ala, and to go then through something else, inshallah ta'ala. So we'll stop here, inshallah. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وصحبه وسلم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.